Hello and welcome to the lecture series on monetary economics. In the previous classes, we have seen a couple of concepts associated with regional rural banks in the Indian context, and in the segue of the same, we have talked about the problems associated with regional rural banks, and in today's class, I'll be talking about the possible solutions to tackle these problems. So let's get started. The first point is talking about mergers. Now, for the feasibility and viability of an organization, this is the best possible option. What can be done is a entity which is not performing in a well fashion can be merged with an entity which is performing really good. For example, these banks which are not performing really good, meaning thereby the regional rural banks, can be merged with any commercial bank which is performing at a really good level or is doing really good. So this can be a possible way to probably tackle the problems associated with regional rural banks in the Indian context. I'm not saying that this is the only solution and this should be done, but this is again a very nice solution because there's one entity which is performing really good and there is another entity which is not performing really good. They can be clubbed together, and therefore the entity which is performing really good will take care of the one which is not doing so, which is not doing well. So this is one way of looking at how you can solve the problems associated with regional rural banks, that is by mergers, that is by clubbing them with a commercial bank which is performing really good. So I hope this point is pretty much clear. Let us now move to the next point, which is mobilization of funds. So rather than, now in this point I'm talking about mobilization of funds or mobilization of capital. So what can be done is, rather than depending upon the rural segments which are already weaker, what the banks can do is they can fetch money from the urban sectors, and also they can ask the government or quasi-government institutions in the rural parts of the country to possibly cater or possibly pool in their funds towards regional rural banks. That can be the good solution to tackle the problem of mobilization of funds, because we have seen in the problems that mobilization of fund is a really big problem, because what happens is the rural section is already weaker, they do not have enough savings, and therefore that savings are not coming towards the financial institution, meaning thereby the regional rural bank, and as a result of that, mobilization of funds is a big problem. Now this problem can be tackled with the help of this solution, that is, it can be from the urban to rural movement, and also from different quasi-government as well as government agencies which are already operating in the rural parts of the country. They can park their funds in regional rural banks. So this is again an important solution for the problem of mobilization of funds. So I hope these 2 points are pretty much clear. Let us now move to the next point, which is effectively talking about proper branch expansion. Now what happened is, the branch expansion happened, but that happened in a haphazard manner. So that means when it is not happening at a very good rate or at a very good level, then there is a concentration of branches at one particular district or one particular state. That shouldn't be the case. What should be the case is, branch expansion should be comprehensive, it should be in a sparse sense, and it should also be complemented with equal amount of skilled laborers or skilled manpower. If there is a branch in, say, district A, and that in n number of villages in district A, but all the n branches are not performing at that level, is just because they do not have sufficient skilled staff. So therefore only the presence of branch doesn't make any sense. It should also be complemented with sufficient skilled staff. So this is again another way in which the haphazard branch expansion problem can be tackled in a very structured manner. So this is again the third point, which is talking about the possible solution to tackle the problems associated with regional rural banks in India. So I hope this is pretty much clear. Let us now move to the next point, which is talking about good coordination. Now we talked about coordination problem amongst different agencies operating at the district level, the state level, and also the grassroots level or central level. So now what can be done is, a good communication is expected between the district development planning agency as well as the district credit planning agency. Now these two agencies should coordinate amongst themselves, and then there will be a possible way in which the credit planning can be achieved at a rate that is expected from the regional rural banks, because credit dissemination is the major reason why regional, or to be very precise, credit dissemination to certain weaker sections of the society is the primary aim of regional rural banks. So this can be done when there is a proper communication between the development planning agency as well as the credit planning agency at the district levels. Furthermore, cooperative banks can also be made as a sponsor or co-sponsor with the state government, central government and the commercial banks, which are sponsors for regional rural banks. So you can borrow funds from cooperative banks as well, just make them a co-sponsor. So this is how you can tackle the problem of coordination among different agencies and therefore solve the problem associated with regional rural banks, that is lack of coordination problem. So I hope this point is pretty much clear. Let us now move to the next point, which is talking about widening the sphere of activity, meaning thereby along with credit dissemination, the regional rural banks can get into something called as consultancy services. They can probably arrange some phased credit program, that is credit will be given in a phased manner. They can also go for something called as different sort of employment programs. So these are different ways in which the sphere of activity of regional rural banks can be expanded, can be widened. Initially, it was only looking at credit dissemination or giving out credit to the needy farmers, needy entrepreneurs, small entities in the rural parts of the country. But now what can they do is they can widen their sphere of activity. They can move towards consultancy services for the farmers. They can move towards different employment programs. They can move towards something called as phased credit programs and all of that. So this is how you can solve the problems. These are the possible solutions which will help the regional rural banks to solve the problems associated with them. So I hope the points are pretty much clear. First, I talked about mergers with good performing institutions, that is commercial banks. Then we talked about mobilization of funds, that is not only dependent upon rural segments but also taking into account the quasi government agencies and the government agencies also moving the funds from urban segment to the rural segment. Then we talked about something called as the proper expansion of branches coupled with or complemented with skilled labor or skilled force. Then we talked about good coordination among different agencies, meaning thereby the district development planning agency as well as district credit planning agency will work in coordination, will communicate properly and therefore disseminate the credit which is available for rural segments. And also we can make the cooperative banks as a co-sponsor for regional rural banks. And lastly, I talked about widening the sphere of activity of regional rural banks, that is merely staying into credit dissemination doesn't help you much. You can also get into consultancy services, employment programs, you can get into phased credit dissemination programs and all of that. So I hope the points are pretty much clear. In the next lecture, I'll be talking about some more points which will help us understand how the problems of regional rural banks can be solved. So please stay tuned. Thank you.